The S4S Designing a Sensibility for Sustainable Clothing project is University of Exeter and University of Wolverhampton co-hosted 20-month research project looking at how people think, feel and act around their relationship with clothing.
We've done a lot of work on different research projects where we use crafting and creative making as a means to explore people's engagement and participation and improve their lives in terms of how they can be healthier, more active, how it can compensate loneliness and isolation. Thinking about fashion in terms of sustainability is surprisingly new. In terms of our conversations with our participants, it's meant rethinking what fashion really means.
Within the bid, there was a proposal for how the project would take shape, and that hinged around working with volunteer participants to expose them to making, mending and upcycling workshops, during which time these participants would be feeding back qualitative experiential data.
We started thinking about how to tackle it from a social design perspective. The idea that in order to change people's behaviour to make them more pro-environmental is that you need to provide three things. You need to provide them with some skills or competencies, some things that they can use, or maybe a place and some infrastructure. In our case, that's things like sewing machines. And you need to provide them with senses of meaning that they can latch onto to change their behaviour. So that's really where it started coming from.
It's really interesting, the idea of connecting making to behaviour change and sustainability, and the opportunity to work in a cross-disciplinary team with social scientists who would really look at the evidence of behaviour change.
I've done lots of qualitative research before where I've met a participant for 1 hour and done an interview with them, and then I've done the same interview with another 19 people and then analysed the results and worked out the themes going through it. But never have I done anything with so much in-depth connection with the individual. We've spent 20 days in workshops, we've been around their houses, we've looked in their wardrobes, we've had a cup of coffee with them, we've learned to really get to know these people and understand what motivates their behaviour. Plus, we've been able to generate all these friendships and make it really good fun in the process.
It's very much been about joining up the dots around fashion and clothing as something that we can enjoy and love and take pleasure in, but also something that has an enormous environmental impact and therefore a great deal of urgency. Then we've brought into the mix these issues around creativity, which understands change, not in terms of something that's prescriptive, but much more in terms of envisaging fashion as something that we can both love and enjoy, but practice sustainably.
It's an invitation for people who have previously just been on that hamster wheel of buying, using and then maybe throwing away, to reconsider through the lens of making how to engage with the clothing that they wear and own in a deeper way, to be able to put their own personality onto the clothes that they have by embellishing them or mending them, or maybe just reconsidering their choices of what they buy in the first instance.
The idea of the creative making workshop is really at the heart of the research method that we're using. We also wanted to try and track behaviour change, if it's happening first of all, and if it is, to what extent it's happening. The project was set up as a co-creation project. So the idea behind that is that we're all researchers on the project, that the research team work in collaboration with the participants.
One of the best things about the project is the fact that people have just got so involved with it and so absorbed in it.
It became a wonderful environment for people to learn new skills, very supportive.
In Penryn, we had 12 participants who would regularly come in. In fact, one of the reasons we picked them was because they had significant differences in the amount of skills that they had, in the amount of existing knowledge that they had. Because the idea would be that they could then teach each other and talk to each other, co-create learning amongst one another. Then we had participants saying, the reason I keep coming is because I so much love the company, I've made new friends. They also talked to me about how they love meeting a bunch of people who are similar to each other, when actually, at face value, there were a bunch of very, very different people who dressed in different ways, who had different clothes purchasing habits, who had different amounts of skill, and yet they really felt they had something in common, and that thing they had in common was this idea of trying to be more sustainable in their clothing.
One of the things we noticed right from the start was how enthusiastic and interested people were. And that was evident right from the beginning, from the launch event in Cornwall and also in the Midlands. We had huge numbers of people interested in coming along. They were, one, really interested in the creative side of things, and two, they really wanted to make change in their own lives. Fashion and clothing isn't just a separate subject, it's part of a way of life. And I think a lot of the participants started connecting that up and thinking really seriously about their behaviour, about the decisions they make in their everyday lives. If we're thinking about sustainability in relation to our clothing, we tend to be thinking about it in relation to all the other things that are part of our everyday lives. One of the really interesting aspects of the project is the way it's interdisciplinary, in that it brings together social science and arts research methods. So I think that's probably one of the challenging and risky elements, but I think that's really paid off in terms of evidencing change and then actually exploring how change happens. So it combines what we call qualitative and quantitative methods.
We did surveys with people when they came to the launch event. Then at every workshop that they attended, we did some form of recording feedback, whether it was asking people to write feedback forms or do audio recording. And we also encouraged people to use their sketchbook clothing diaries throughout the process.
We developed a range of different research methods and techniques that included what we call clothing diaries, filmmaking, questionnaires, and wardrobe audits.
This is where I think working with the politics research is really useful, because there are people in the politics research community who are doing very detailed research on aspects of behaviour change, answering exactly those sorts of questions. There's a huge amount of social research there that we can draw on. We can also use that to sort of inform our follow-on project ideas. We do work in a world where text and language is dominant, but when we're working with practical creativity, then we've got to champion other ways of developing and articulating ideas. There's got to be space in research to be able to work with all of that visual material and the actual objects that we've made, as well as the things that people have talked about and articulated through language.
A lot of what my colleagues do in universities across the world is they might do some interviews, but they'll spend a lot of time sitting at their desk. I don't know anybody else in political science who was driving around with a van load of sewing machines to different community venues. That is, so far as I know, very, very novel in my discipline. I had no idea that the project would be so well received by the reviewers of our grant application, because it was, in my view, very, very different from anything I'd ever done before and almost anything people from my discipline have ever done as well. Usually I would sketch out a project and I'd be absolutely 100% specific about exactly what I was going to do at every stage of the process. With this, we were flexible to bringing in new ideas and changing things and listening to our participants and listening to our consultants about the shape and form that our workshops could take. I think that's one of the beautiful things about the project was, okay, I may have had the initial idea, but then Fiona supplemented that with this idea of making it co-created. And then we developed this idea of working across the universities from Penryn to Wolverhampton. And we built in ideas for exchanging artefacts and having reflective Skype conversations with one another.
About 40 people got involved, and they got involved for the long term of the project. So that was really exciting. But then it was also about how they talked about how the different workshop activities was changing their clothing behaviour. It was about themselves, their own interests, their own lives, their own habits, their own enthusiasms, their own abilities and skills. It was very interesting how they adopted what we were doing, but adapted it. They sort of embedded it within their daily lives.
It's a really complex ambition, and the way that we broke it down in the project was talking about thinking, feeling and acting, but all of those thoughts and feelings and actions are also very complex. We were purposefully trying to create a space that enables people to develop the capacity to live more sustainably. There isn't a simple message. It is complex, it is emotional, and it does take time.
It became quite clear that when you empower people with skills and information, they are likely to engage with that. It's also about feeling proactive and also having some personal choice aside from what's on offer.
I really distinctly remember a conversation early on in the first set of workshops where people latched onto the idea that sustainable clothing was about buying second-hand. What I then saw through the process of the workshops was a real expansion on those ideas, bringing loads of different approaches to thinking about sustainability.
The mill tour, just looking at how much effort went into getting a piece of fleece off a sheep's back to a spun yarn that can actually be used to make a jumper, and all the different mechanical cleaning, coloration processes before it's even made into a garment. I think that definitely was a great springboard for people's eyes being opened and their awareness growing.
Even people who were quite skilled and confident were still surprised about working with knitwear, because that's something that they felt wasn't possible to adapt and rework. Knitwear was something that if it got to the end of its life with you, then you had to pass it on to someone else. With the pattern making, they thought it was something that was a professional skill that you could only get from attending university and studying pattern cutting. They were surprised that it was something that they could actually do for themselves, and that opened up a whole realm of possibilities of making their own clothing.
People who have convinced themselves, I can't use a sewing machine, at the end of those workshop sessions, finding that they can. Those were the sort of points that really provided the real shifts in people's thinking and feeling and actions that provided the material for the data that responds to the whole research question. There were pivotal moments, like the showing of the True Cost film. For some people, it was a shock. They hadn't quite thought about the overall impact of the fashion and textiles industry, the whole ethics as well as the logistics and all of the different elements that make the current fashion system problematic. To see that in one documentary, people were clearly moved. If they were already teetering on the brink of changing their behaviour around what they bought, where they bought it from, how they valued stuff, that definitely accelerated that change for them.
The impression I get is that people's views about what sustainable clothing mean have become more holistic and a bit more nuanced. We had some participants at the start who said sustainability of clothing means thinking about child labour. By the end of the project, they were saying, yes, it doesn't only mean child labour, it means thinking about the soil, it means thinking about the cotton production, the people who produce the cotton, the dyeing process, about how that's manufactured, the shipping and transportation, and thinking about what happens to the product once it's past its useful life. That was really encouraged by the way that we took our participants through a journey of clothing. So we took them to a wool mill where they saw raw fleece being turned into wool. We helped them to dye some wool. We helped them to weave a piece of cloth. They could then appreciate how complex it is to have a piece of cloth in the first place, let alone to then think about sewing that into a garment and then trying to sell that. One of the things I've been keen to do on the project is to try and show that actually you can be really cool in your own style.
Quite a lot of the people said, I like my clothes, but I wouldn't necessarily think of myself as being terribly fashionable. Yet clothes and clothing are really important to me.
Why does everybody want to be like this supposed alpha male or supposed alpha female when actually consistently chasing that dream and buying more and earning more and forever chasing? We know that doesn't make anybody happy. So I think it's about thinking about happiness. I think we began to foster that amongst our participants.
Fashion isn't something that's just about top designers in Paris or wherever. It's actually about everyday clothing and our relationship with our clothes, which means our relationship with our identity. A number of people took a pledge not to buy any new clothes for a year when the project was going on. They would swap clothes, they would creatively remake them and upcycle them, they'd go to charity shops. All the participants said that being part of the project made them think twice about going and buying a new garment. It's just that matter of pausing, thinking twice and thinking, do I really need this garment? What have I got in my wardrobe that I haven't worn? The wardrobe audits were absolutely fascinating. The participants will estimate how many clothes that they've got, and then they do a detailed count using a form that we give them. I think just about everybody underestimated how many garments they had. It gave people the opportunity to really talk about their clothes. Certain garments have particular memories, some are sometimes inherited by family, worn at particular events. The way that we relate to our clothing in terms of our identities and our memories and who we are and who we could be really came out, and they were really, really fun to do.
One of our participants gave up counting once she got to about 500 items and said, "That's it, I've got too many things." And she's been on a mission ever since to try to reduce the amount of things that she buys. And I think this is a big takeaway message for anybody who wants to follow the project. Have a look in your wardrobe, have a think about what's there, why it's there, where it came from, who made it. Do you need all of this stuff? Do you need to keep buying more clothes? And I think those kinds of reflections will be really important in helping everybody out there to develop more of a sensibility for sustainable clothing.
When we first met participants, we came up with this little mantra of think, feel, act. So it's that emotional engagement that actually precipitates change and keeps change going. That is something that comes across in the films. Films are just a fantastic way for them to reflect back on their experience of the project, to actually get emotionally engaged in the project again.
Our respondents have watched all of the videos produced by our filmmakers and reflected on whether they represent the project as they saw it, and it seems to me that the filmmakers have done an incredible job.
One participant said the films helped her remember what it was like, the way that they actually brought back that feeling of being creative, of being part of a group. So we see the films as very much a way of not just recording what happened, but they serve as a prompt.
We have, of course, now the YouTube channel that people can refer to that I think is a really good record of what we've managed to achieve on the project.
When we're thinking about engagement and how we can set up these kinds of opportunities in the longer term, it has got to fit in with people's lives. It is difficult to find time to do something that might feel like a non-essential change. And yet what we found is when people were able to engage with us and come to the workshops, that it did really feed back positively.
It became clear that we were attracting mainly women, and women who already had some kind of an interest in making and mending. That in itself is kind of evidence as to who is engaged with and open to being part of a research project around sustainable clothing.
So one of the problems that we've had was getting men involved, but men wear clothes too, and the clothes that men wear have sustainability implications as well. I haven't quite yet worked out how to get those kinds of people involved in the project, which is why I think our idea of a follow-on project, making it exceedingly visible in high streets, I think then we might begin to be able to reach the less usual suspects.
We didn't really have a clear idea about the age of participants we were working with. It was really more about people's interest in terms of getting involved. But it was significant for us that a number of younger people did get involved. One area that also emerged was mothers and daughters working together, and also in one instance a father and daughter. That was something we hadn't anticipated, but participants themselves brought along their children because they really wanted their kids to learn these skills, but also for their kids to be thinking themselves about these questions around sustainability and sustainable fashion. Our results have shown how making together really activates people, builds what we call their assets, the kind of skills and capabilities that they have. And that's not just in terms of their sewing skills, it's also in terms of their social skills.
Throughout the project, the response to the workshops was one of delight and a sense of empowerment and new pathways opening for them. Everyone was expounding how much they were enjoying the workshop experiences, learning the skills, as well as the social nourishment that they were getting from spending time in a group regularly. So not only does it live with the participants in their experiential memories and reflections, but it also exists on paper as part of the Environmental Audit Committee report.
Our contribution to that report was about creative making groups and pop-ups working in the high street.
Ideally, you wouldn't be able to walk down the high street without bumping into somebody who's doing some making or mending or could advise you on how to make or mend something. And we've begun to strike up a relationship with Cancer Research UK, who's quite happy for us to have people making and mending clothes in the front window of their charity shop. The idea would be to monitor that and see how it goes, hopefully get some good evidence that this kind of thing is going to take off, that there's appetite from the public for it, and then try to get some of the more mainstream high street fashion retailers interested in this idea of improving the durability of the clothes that they sell, but also making money out of it. Because the last thing we want to do is say, you're not allowed to ever buy any more clothes ever again. It's about finding new and creative ways to encourage the clothing economy to be more sustainable.
We're living in a time where there are lots of scary messages about the environment and about environmental crisis. And yet people are stretched and under pressure and maybe don't have a lot of money and don't have a lot of time. And so the idea of living more sustainably can be seen as something that's too difficult. One of the contributions that we can make through this project is that by expanding the ideas of what it means to live more sustainably, we can hopefully open up the accessibility of sustainable living to more people.
We've done a lot of work not only to help our participants become more environmentally aware and environmentally friendly in their clothing choices, but I think we've also helped people to realise business opportunities in this as well, and that makes it exceedingly impactful on a number of levels.
It's always amazing when you have a room full of people who are on the surface learning the same thing, and yet every individual does something completely different with it. I think there will be lots of different things that will happen as a result of this project that we probably won't even see.
Although the formal part of the project has come to an end, I don't think that the project itself is going to end. People are adopting it in their everyday lives in various ways. It's obviously going to live on through the lives of all of our participants. And, our participants want to voluntarily set up making and mending workshops where they can hire out a local hall, pay some money, carry on making and mending and being friends together. People are now thinking more broadly about all sorts of products, from food, cleaning products, the way they behave in their everyday lives. Yeah, I think it's had a big effect.
People seem to be getting to a point where just buying stuff isn't necessarily making them happy. They actually want more meaningful things in their lives. And that might involve other people, so there'd be a temporary community. But it's a shared experience. They're not just on their own, sat with a sewing machine and a YouTube video. There's a hunger within communities for people to pick up a needle and thread, a bit of fabric, some wool and some knitting needles and have a go. There's already existing evidence about how crafting and making is nourishing for your mental health.
One of the big finds was that actually by learning these skills, working with others, being creative, enjoying all those processes, we can change our behaviour, but in ways that are pleasurable. And then that makes it much more likely we're actually going to do it.